Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 13, the City of the Arabian Nights, of a long civilization's trail, an account of recent experiences in mystic places and strange lands by Ralph M. Lewis, KRC. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 16, Number 3, April 1938. A Long Civilization's Trail by Ralph M. Lewis, KRC. Editor's note. This is the 13th episode of a narrative by the Supreme Secretary relating the experiences he and his party had in visiting mystic shrines and places in Europe and the ancient world. The City of the Arabian Nights. Before us, stretching across this historical Tigris River and joined together at their ends, was a parallel line of pontoons, floating inflated metal tubes. Heavy planks were fastened across them horizontally. This was a pontoon bridge which Americans or Europeans never see, except during military campaigns or in times of emergency. Across it in both directions flowed a stream of humanity. As our car entered upon the first unit of it, the bridge sank deeply into the water, but did not submerge and easily held the weight. As the car ran upon the next section, the preceding one we had left rose again. It caused a peculiar bobbing motion which agitated the river's surface and sent out a backwash or current on either side. Looking down and upstream, we saw at about quarter-mile intervals 3 other similar bridges. These bridges, the only ones of any kind in existence there, were put down by the British during the World War for the movement of their troops and armament across the large river. In their campaign against the Turks, Great Britain lost a great number of men within the vicinity of Baghdad, but was eventually successful. These pontoon bridges were very crude and very old, but far superior to the ancient ferry methods, and were now maintained by the Arabian government. Ahead of us on the east bank lay Baghdad, a strange skyline indeed. The structures were of no particular design. They were not definitely Oriental, Byzantine, Moorish or European, but a sort of abortion, as though they were going through a transition of Eastern architecture into Western. The hotels, so-called, had strange and crude balconies superimposed, which hung, so it seemed to us, precariously over the banks of the river. Most of the structures were very low, shanty-like, and sprawling without any particular design, and even at this distance suggested neglect and perhaps filth. Originally, Baghdad lay entirely on the eastern bank of the river, but for the past 1,000 years it has been partly on the east and partly on the west. A traveler who visited it in 1583 said of it a town not very great but very populous, of great traffic between Persia, Turkey and Arabia. Time has not changed this. Baghdad is the gateway for caravans to Persia, the border of which is but a few miles distant. Southward lies Arabia and northward Turkey. In the 8th century it was purely an Arab town. In the 9th century it had reached the height of its power under an enlightened caliphate and was a center of power and learning. It was rich in silks and tile buildings, and it was of the Baghdad of the 9th century that the glamorous tales of the Arabian Nights were written. Its downfall came about in 1258 when Hulagu and his Mongols swarmed over it and ruined the network of magnificent irrigation canals which had converted the parched land around it into a rich and fertile plain. In the 15th century it succumbed to Turkish invasion. The nearby little village Hilla preserves more of the original, truly oriental nature of the ancient city than does Baghdad, which is a hodgepodge of influences, the result of numerous conquests and migrations. Perhaps one of the most impressive things to see in Baghdad is what is known as a caravanserai, which operates in the form of a bank, and in which money, customs and trade are carried on in the same manner as they have been for centuries. To visit one of these places is to be transplanted backward in point of time for centuries. On the outside, it is just another mud brick building, substantial, somewhat resembling our large warehouses in America. When you enter, it takes you a moment or two to get adjusted to the darkness inside, in contrast to the glaring light from which you entered. There before you is a great area. No partitions or rooms, just high posts at intervals of a few feet around the wall, which support a mezzanine floor about half the height of the entire building. In this great area before you are piled bales wrapped in skins of animals, or in what looks like coarse burlap, A pungent odor prevails, a mingling of pleasant spices and not too pleasant smells. Up above on the mezzanine floor are little dingy booths, we might term them offices, in which banking operations are carried on using the same primitive methods of several centuries ago. These men are financiers and they loan money for the organization of caravans to go to distant lands, perhaps Persia or Arabia, there to purchase as cheaply as possible, and bring back such cargoes as they feel can be sold to the best advantage. When the cargo is returned, it is brought into this huge building and sold to the highest bidder. From the receipts, the banker or financier takes his principal and his interest, if there is sufficient to meet both, and the caravan organizer receives what is left, if any. If he is fortunate, he makes a substantial profit. If unfortunate, he not only makes no profit, but finds himself still indebted to these financiers, most of whom are Persians. Here one sees trade and barter and business undisturbed by the modern methods of the Western world. With the exception of Rashid Street, which is the main thoroughfare of Baghdad, the majority of the streets are very narrow, alley-like, dark, unclean, swarming with flies attracted by refuse which is permitted to lie until it becomes putrid. Again, one is attracted by the great number of natives with infected eyes, men, women and children. A clear, normal pair of eyes is an unusual sight. Strange as it may seem, the lack of sanitation and hygiene causes this infection of the eyes in early childhood. Having a superstitious fear of medical treatment, they avoid physicians, of which there are only a few anyway. We noticed a number of these natives with a painted red circle around the infected eye. We were informed that some few who had received medical treatment had applied to their eyes some medicine which colored the skin temporarily with a red hue, and because it gave them relief, they attributed to the red some efficiency. And thus they used a red ink of their own making to paint around the eyes, believing the color itself, rather than the ingredients, to be remedial. No attempt was made in any of the native markets to keep the food clean or to protect it from filth. Hawksters sold their bread and cakes from curbs, stacking them on the walks and peddling them with their filthy hands. The craftsmanship of these people, however, is remarkable and is extremely educational to watch, especially is this so in the Copper Bazaar. This bazaar is really like a street covered with an arched roof. It is divided into little pens. In each of these little pens, or booths, some craftsman sets up his shop in which he manufactures his wares. All of the wares in this bazaar or street are made of copper. Here one finds magnificent copper samovars, copper tea kettles, basins and bowls, ornaments and candlesticks. The copper work is rustic and very substantial. Walking down this alley street, one can see copper being fashioned in every form and see it in different stages of manufacture, back against the wall in the darkness of the booth. At midday, which is ordinarily extremely hot even in the open, are little boys, not more than 8 or 9 years of age, who are earning their apprenticeship by pumping the bellows of charcoal fires to keep tools hot or to heat copper plate. One can hardly see them for the smoke and metal fumes which, even where we stand, cause us to turn our heads away so as not to inhale them and irritate our throats. We can understand when we see this why so many of these people die of consumption early in life. It is remarkable that anyone survives these conditions to reach manhood. They are a jolly lot, good-natured, curious about Westerners. Very few tourists ever reach Baghdad. It has not quite the atmosphere for the one who likes his tennis courts, swimming pools, afternoon tea, drives, cocktail hours, and a few holes of golf. These things do not go with Baghdad. Here is the East unveneered. If one accepts a drink, either water or a local concoction, sweet, brightly colored, he is taking his life in his hands, for the Westerner's system is not immune to the things which the natives survive. In the hotels, that is, the two where Westerners stop when they do visit Baghdad, the water is purified through a special process. To drink any other water is risking one's life in no uncertain way. In Baghdad, there is also one of the largest leprosy hospitals of the Near East, the contributing conditions we saw about us at every step. And yet there are some inspiring sights as well. To Miss Gertrude Bell must go credit for establishing in the Near East one of the first museums for the collection of the antiquities of this ancient land. An attractive building, unusually clean, houses her marvelous collection. The palace of the late King of Iraq is also an unusual place to visit, as it is now a state museum and is so simple in contrast to what one imagines the ancient caliphs had. Most of the exhibits, unfortunately, consist of just his own personal belongings. His riding habit, the costumes he wore on different state occasions, and little personal trinkets given to him as gifts by the Shah of Persia, sultans of Turkey, and some of the kings of Europe. On the western edge of Baghdad lies the great racetrack. Here each year in the fall are races in which the horses are entered by Bedouins, chieftains, Kurds and Persians. It is purely sport with them, and is not the commercial venture that racing is in the Western world. The finest blooded Arabian stock is entered, and buyers and breeders of horses from all over the world come to this annual series of races to bid for the winner for breeding purposes. As the racing was to begin about a week after we were to take our departure from Baghdad, several were already training their horses on the track, and we marveled at the speed, grace, and beauty of these rather small horses. After having taken a number of still photographs of unusual places and scenes in Baghdad, we entered a small doorway on Rashid Street and found in the dim interior the most magnificent display of Persian and Arabian rugs we had ever seen. There was no attempt at ostentation. The rugs were piled high over the floors and fastened on pegs around the walls. A brass hand-hammered ancient oil lamp was the only means of illumination. The rugs were covered with dust, yet were in excellent condition. Pricing a large rug of beautiful design, I was surprised to learn that all the rugs were 35 years and older. More surprising still were the unbelievably cheap prices. The large rug before me cost but $20, and in America, England or Canada it would have brought easily 25 times that price. Seeing that I was interested, the gracious proprietor drew the rug out from the others and bade us follow him, which we did. Going through a little passageway, we suddenly came out on another of the splendid little gardens which are in back of the home of each fairly prosperous merchant in Baghdad. No matter how dark, how filthy, or how squalid his place of business or his living quarters, if he can at all afford it, you will find in back of them a gem of a little Persian garden. Mosaic tiling, running water, fountain, and an artistic array of green shrubbery, open to the blue sky above, clapping his hands in Eastern fashion. He summoned his assistants and ordered them in Arabic to clean the rug. This they did by filling their mouths with water from a pail and then spraying it out on the rug. Then, taking their hands, they rubbed the nap vigorously, which brought back the brilliance of the colors. The rugs were all made from camel's hair. And in broken English, he explained that most of these rugs are not made by factories or any place organized for the commercial production of rugs, but are a pastime and a family or tribal industry. The rugs are brought in by the Bedouins or desert wanderers, 2 or 3 at a time, and for these they receive a paltry sum. This merchant exported his rugs to various parts of the world where they would sell at fabulous prices. By this time we had visited a number of mosques, but no mosque was more splendid, more lavish, more like a jewel set in squalor than the gold mosque of Kadimane, see June 1937 issue of the Rosicrucian Digest. The towers and minarets and the central dome itself were all of pure gold and fascinated the impoverished natives, a symbol of wealth and riches surrounded by poverty, disease and filth. It was something, however, to lift the thoughts of the people from their circumstances, to give them some appreciation of the beautiful and the sublime, something they could not bring into their own lives, something that could not exist in their homes. We stood and listened to the intriguing wail and prayer of the muezzin, the Mohammedan priest. It was with extreme difficulty that we were able to take cinematographic pictures of this mosque, as one must avoid offending the religious principles of these people. At night, the scene changes. Peaceful side streets have lurking assassins in them. A person who dares to venture down them unarmed will be slain and robbed. The Iraqian police force, efficient in many ways, is incapable of policing the entire area. The people are mostly barbarians and seem strangely attired, even when they do wear Western clothes. The Bedouins who bring cargoes across the desert or who came to trade with the city dwellers enter the city nightly for entertainment, and they visit the native cabarets or cafes in which dancers go through sensuous gyrations, which, in addition to the native liquor, help intoxicate their senses. The Bedouins are powerfully built men, all of 6 feet or more in height, large-boned. Typical of their racial characteristics, they have large aquiline noses, big bony hands and large feet. Ordinarily they are mild-mannered and extremely generous, but temperamental and easily offended. Freighter Brower and I visited a native eating place one noon and were the only Westerners present. Had we known this, we would not have entered. All the rest were Bedouins attired in flowing robes, sandals, armed with dirks. Looking us over curiously, they immediately came forward, proffered us cigarettes and cups of Arabian coffee, which one must acquire a habit for over a long period of time. And since I had not been in Baghdad that length of time, I could not become accustomed to the molasses-like substance and quinine-like taste. Another scene is the river with its strange modes of transportation. Very few motorcraft are seen, mostly barges that are moved by long skiffs or poles. The strangest boat of all seen anywhere in the world is the Gufa. It is a sewing basket-like boat about 6 feet in diameter and woven of a river reed, being perfectly circular. It has neither bow nor stern. It is guided by a pole, and it is indeed an amusing sight to see these baskets floating downstream, loaded with cargo and with their one-man crew. These strange boats have navigated the Tigris River for centuries. Herodotus, ancient historian, in his accounts of his travels through Babylonia, mentions these Gufa boats and explains how the natives far north of Baghdad make these boats, put on board their wares in a burrow and sail downstream with them for miles to market. There they sell their wares, break up the boat, sell it as firewood and ride home again on the burro. Burros are not common in Baghdad and neither are trucks. Human beings are the cargo bearers. Here we see coolies for the first time in the East, white men staggering along under unbelievable burdens, enormous timbers which must weigh at least 300 pounds or more. These men will carry anything that it is humanly possible to carry, and for a few cents a mile they carry coal, iron or cans of petroleum. The muscles of their legs and backs are abnormally developed, and unless they cease their activities of carrying these tremendous weights day in and day out early in life, they soon die. Most of them become afflicted with varicose veins, the result of overdevelopment of the muscles and causing an exceptional flow of blood through the arteries. It is pitiful to see a human being competing with animals as burden bearers. You can hire a human being to carry cargo, furniture, case goods, anything, cheaper than you could possibly hire either a camel or a burro for short hauls in and around the city. They live on rice and water, unclean water. Their income hardly exceeds 35 or 40 a week if they work steadily, and yet they seem much more intelligent than peoples we had seen in other lands. They do not have the vacuous look in their eyes, that hopeless, despairing look. They are bright and cheerful. Their fathers and grandfathers before them have carried loads as they do. A steady stream of them cross pontoon bridges from one bank of the river to the other, like ants, carrying for a mile or more what an ordinary man could hardly lift. But Baghdad was not our final destination in this country. We were to go southeast to Babylon, the Babylon of biblical times, the Babylon of history. It was with enthusiasm and expectancy that we prepared for our next adventure. We found it difficult to secure porters to accompany us, always enthusiastic, hoping to earn some extra money, until they learned that our destination was Babylon. They offered then excuses that seemed strange to us. No, they did not wish to go to Babylon. We tried to draw out of them why. We would pay them well. It was not a great journey. Our equipment was not unusually heavy. They avoided making any explanation. They would merely suggest someone else who, perhaps, would go instead. We puzzled over this as we prepared for the highlight of our journey along civilization's trail. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.